Copper Creek feared women who refused to be owned. It was the kind of frontier settlement where men carried both guns and grudges in equal measure, and where a woman with secrets was considered more dangerous than a loaded pistol in trembling hands. For in this dust-choked corner of the territory, there existed an unspoken rule that a woman's value was measured by her submission, and Isabella Wade had never once bowed her head to any man. Copper Creek had sprung from the earth like a weed, unwanted, but determined to survive. Nestled in a forgotten valley where gold had been promised but never delivered, it festered with saloons that outnumbered churches 3-1, and boarding houses where desperate men gambled away their futures on cards, dealt from sleeves. The town existed in that lawless gap between civilization and wilderness, where a man's reputation was built on how quickly he could draw, and a woman's on how quietly she could suffer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Isabella Wade rode into town on a storm-grey mare with nothing but a Winchester rifle, a leather satchel of mysterious contents, and eyes that cut through men like they were made of paper. She wasn't running toward Copper Creek so much as away from somewhere else, and the dust that clung to her forest-green riding coat told of a journey measured in weeks, not days. Unlike most women who arrived in frontier towns, widows, mail order, brides, or soiled doves looking for fresh clientele, Isabella came alone and unspoken for. Her first act upon dismounting outside the Copper Crown Hotel was to request a room of her own, payment 3 months in advance. When the clerk stammered that unmarried women weren't allowed rooms without male accompaniment, Isabella simply placed a heavy pouch of gold coins on the counter. The sound they made, like distant church bells, silenced his objections. "My name is Miss Wade," she stated, her voice carrying the faintest trace of an accent no one could quite place. "I'll be staying through the winter. I require privacy and discretion." With that, she signed the ledger in a flowing script that suggested an education far beyond what frontier women typically possessed. By sundown, rumors had already begun to circulate. Some said she was a fallen aristocrat from back east. Others whispered that she was fleeing a husband, or worse, had killed one. The more sympathetic souls suggested she might be a widow seeking a new beginning. But it was Marshal Silas Blackwood who offered the most dangerous speculation of all when he held court at Mulligan's saloon that evening. "A woman traveling alone in these parts," he drawled, whiskey glistening on his moustache, "is either running from the law or bringing trouble with her. Either way, she won't find Copper Creek hospitable for long." Isabella settled into her room on the hotel's second floor, the one with the corner window overlooking both Main Street and the trail leading out of town. She arranged her belongings with military precision, clothing in the wardrobe, a small writing desk positioned by the window, and a locked wooden case placed beneath her bed. She unpacked books that raised eyebrows when the hotel maid reported their titles: medical texts, anatomical diagrams, and journals written in French. 3 days after her arrival, Isabella hung a small hand-painted sign beside her door that created more questions than it answered. "I Wade, healer and midwife, consultations by appointment E." A town with no doctor, save for old Jenkins who pulled teeth and set bones when sober enough to hold his instruments. A woman offering medical services should have been welcomed. Instead, the sign became a source of suspicion. Women healers in these territories often lived on the knife's edge between acceptance and accusation. A successful treatment might earn gratitude. A failed one could spark whispers of witchcraft. It began with cautious visits from the town's most desperate. A miner's wife with a pregnancy advancing poorly, a saloon girl with wounds she couldn't explain, a child with a fever that wouldn't break. Isabella treated them all with a calm competence that spoke of formal training. She mixed tinctures from supplies in her locked case, applied poultices of herbs whose names the townsfolk couldn't pronounce, and kept detailed notes of each patient's in progress. For those first few weeks, Isabella Wade existed in the wary tolerance that frontier towns sometimes extended to necessary outsiders. She spoke little of herself, refused all invitations to social gatherings, and ventured out primarily to gather plants from the surrounding foothills. She paid for her supplies in gold and kept her rifle clean and loaded. Then came the night that changed everything. It was past midnight when pounding fists rattled her door. Isabella opened it to find Lottie, the youngest girl from Madame Rosalie's establishment, her face streaked with tears and blood. "It's Ruby," she gasped. "She's bleeding something awful. Madame says she won't last till morning." Without hesitation, Isabella gathered her supplies and followed. Madame Rosalie's parlour outstood on the town's edge, a two-story structure painted crimson with lanterns that burned through the night. Inside, the usual evening activities had ceased, and a heavy silence hung over the velvet furnishings and gilded mirrors. Upstairs, Ruby lay on sweat-soaked sheets, her skin ashen, blood pooling beneath her. From the doorway, Madame Rosalie watched, with the resigned expression of a woman who had seen such scenes before. "She tried to rid herself of it," Madame explained quietly. "Used a wire." Isabella's face revealed nothing as she set to work. For hours, she labored to save the young woman's life, her hands steady despite the dire circumstances. As dawn broke, Ruby's breathing had stabilized. The bleeding stopped. Isabella gave strict instructions for her care, promised to return, and prepared to leave. She found Marshal Blackwood waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes hard beneath the brim of his hat. "What kind of doctoring goes on here at such hours?" he demanded. "The kind that saves lives," Isabella replied, her voice as cool as the morning air. "Now, step aside, Marshal. I've been working all night." News of Ruby's survival spread through town like wildfire, but the story twisted with each telling. By the following afternoon, Isabella wasn't the woman who had saved her life, but rather the woman who knew how to deal with unwanted circumstances. In a perverse way, this increased her visitors. Women came in secret, seeking knowledge rather than treatment, while simultaneously marking her as dangerous. Marshal Blackwood made his position clear when he cornered Isabella outside the general store a week later. "Folk are talking, Miss Wade," he said, emphasis on her unmarried title. "In my experience, a woman with your particular skills often brings morality issues to decent communities." Isabella met his gaze without flinching. "And in my experience, Marshal, communities that concern themselves so deeply with women's private affairs rarely deserve the title decent." The confrontation might have ended there had Elijah Winters, the town's most prominent businessman and owner of both the bank and mercantile, not witnessed it. A widower with political aspirations and 3 children in need of a mother, Winters had initially viewed Isabella's arrival with calculation rather than suspicion. A well-educated, clearly well-born woman was a rarity in these parts, and despite the rumors, her medical skills suggested a valuable potential wife. "Marshal," Winters interrupted smoothly, "perhaps Miss Wade hasn't had proper opportunity to integrate into our community. As a gesture of frontier hospitality, I'd like to invite her to Sunday dinner at my home." The invitation, delivered with the confidence of a man unused to rejection, caught Isabella off guard. After a moment's consideration, she accepted with the diplomatic grace of someone navigating hostile territory. Sunday dinner at the Winters residence was an elaborate affair. The large house on the hill above town represented Copper Creek's aspirations rather than its reality. Imported furniture, a piano that no one could play properly, and silverware that saw use only when Winters entertained potential investors. His children, 2 boys and a girl ranging from 8 to 14, had been scrubbed and instructed to display manners they rarely practiced. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Isabella arrived in her finest dress, a deep burgundy affair that managed to be both modest and striking. Throughout the meal, she demonstrated the social refinements of a woman clearly raised in privileged circles, charming even the dour housekeeper with her attentiveness to the children. She spoke knowledgeably on topics from literature to current territorial politics, carefully avoiding any mention of her medical practice. Winters, watching her entrance at his table with growing satisfaction, had already begun to envision a future where Isabella's grace and education would advance his standing when the territorial governor eventually visited. After the children were dismissed, he invited her into his study, ostensibly to show her his library. "You're wasted as a solitary healer," he said, pouring brandies without asking her preference. "A woman of your background deserves a position in society commensurate with her upbringing." Isabella accepted the glass but didn't drink. "I find my work fulfilling, Mr. Winters." "Elijah, please," he insisted. "And while I'm sure it has its rewards, surely you must feel the lack of security of family. Copper Creek could use a woman like you in a more official capacity." When she didn't immediately respond, Winters continued, "I'll be direct, Miss Wade. I'm a widower with children requiring maternal guidance and ambitions that would benefit from a wife of refinement. You're a woman alone in dangerous territory, with skills that, while valuable, have already raised uncomfortable questions." Isabella set down her untouched brandy. "Are you proposing an arrangement, Mr. Winters?" "I'm proposing marriage," he replied, as if offering a business opportunity. "Protection, respectability, and comfort in exchange for bringing culture to my home and raising my children. A mutually beneficial arrangement." For a moment, Isabella appeared to consider it, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "I'm afraid I must decline. I've no interest in marriage, to you or anyone. My independence suits me, as does my profession." Winter's face hardened, the mask of gentility slipping. "Independence is a luxury few can afford in these territories, Miss Wade, particularly women with secrets." "We all have secrets," she replied, rising to leave, "though some of us wear them more honestly than others." The rejection transformed Winters from potential protector to dangerous enemy. By morning, his whispers had joined the marshals. Isabella. Wade wasn't merely a woman with questionable medical practices. She was a threat to the moral fabric of Copper Creek itself. 3 days later, Isabella received a formal notice to appear before the town council, a body consisting of Winters, Marshal Blackwood, and 3 other men who owed either money or favors to both. The meeting was set for Sunday after church services, ensuring maximum attendance from the townsfolk. The makeshift town hall, normally used for dances and occasional court proceedings, was packed beyond capacity when Isabella entered. She wore a simple blue dress, her copper hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck, her expression composed despite the hostile murmurs that followed her progress to the front. Elijah Winters called the meeting to order with the gravity of a judge pronouncing sentence. "We're gathered to address concerns regarding Miss Isabella Wade's presence and activities in our community." One by one, the concerns were enumerated. Her unmarried status, her refusal to attend church, her suspicious medical knowledge, her treatment of women in morally compromised conditions, her rejection of proper feminine behavior. No direct accusations were made, but the implication hung in the air like gun smoke. Here was a woman who didn't know her place, who possessed dangerous knowledge, who might lead others astray. Marshal Blackwood spoke at length about the importance of moral order in frontier communities. "Towns like ours balance on the edge of lawlessness," he proclaimed. "Women looking to establish themselves outside the protective structures of marriage and family undermine that balance." When finally permitted to speak, Isabella stood without notes or trembling. Her voice carried to the rafters, steady and clear. "I came to Copper Creek, seeking nothing but peace and the opportunity to use my medical training to ease suffering. I've broken no laws, I've harmed no one. On the contrary, I've saved lives that would otherwise have been lost." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "You speak of morality while condemning a woman for the crime of independence. You invoke protection while threatening one who has asked for none. If healing the sick and refusing unwanted proposals constitutes a threat to your community, then perhaps your community is built on principles that deserve to be threatened." Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd. Winters brought down his gavel. "Miss Wade, you've just demonstrated precisely the dangerous thinking we're concerned about." He glanced at his fellow council members, who nodded in grim agreement. "This council hereby orders you to cease your medical practice immediately and vacate Copper Creek within 7 days. Isabella stood motionless, the color draining from her face not in fear, but in cold rage. "On what grounds?" "Practicing medicine without proper licensing," Marshal Blackwood supplied, "and suspicion of providing immoral services to women." As Isabella opened her mouth to protest, Winters raised his hand. "The council has decided, unless, of course, you'd like to reconsider my offer of a more appropriate position in this community." The silence that followed his thinly veiled proposition hung like a suspended bullet. Isabella's voice, when it finally came, cut through the room with lethal precision. "I'd sooner marry the devil himself than a man who uses power to coerce women into submission." With that, she turned and walked out, spine straight, head high, ignoring the eruption of voices behind her. She didn't see the stranger who had slipped into the back of the hall midway through the proceedings, a man whose eyes, sharp as obsidian beneath a dust-covered hat, followed her exit with unsettling intensity. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Copper Creek's main street. Isabella paused on the town hall steps, the full weight of her situation settling on her shoulders. 7 days to abandon the life she'd carefully constructed. 7 days before she would once again be rootless, hunted. As townsfolk streamed past, some avoiding her gaze while others stared openly, Isabella remained still, a solitary figure framed against the fading light. She had faced expulsion before, had rebuilt from nothing more than once. Yet something in her posture suggested that this time, perhaps, she'd reached the limit of her capacity to flee. What no one realized, not even Isabella herself, was that fate had already dealt a new card into the game. For among those who had witnessed her public condemnation was a man whose reputation was whispered from saloon to saloon across 3 territories. A man whose true name was known to few, but whose deadly skill was legendary. And as Isabella Wade finally descended the steps to return to her room at the Copper Crown, the stranger melted back into the shadows, his weathered hand resting on the custom Colt at his hip. Unlike the others in that hall, he hadn't seen a dangerous woman who needed controlling. He'd recognized a kindred spirit, someone who, like himself, carried wounds that never showed on the surface, but shaped every choice they made in a world, determined to break them. The candle in Isabella's window burned later than usual that night. Behind drawn curtains, she moved with the efficient desperation of someone accustomed to hasty departures. Medical supplies were sorted, books stacked, belongings categorized by necessity. Her hands worked steadily, even as her mind raced through dwindling options. 7 days. The ultimatum echoed in her thoughts like a death knell. She'd survived expulsion before, from a university that discovered her gender despite careful disguise, from a Boston hospital that valued convention over competence, from a Missouri town where her treatments for women's ailments had drawn similar condemnation. Each time she had gathered what remained and pushed forward. Each time something vital had been left behind. As midnight approached, Isabella abandoned her packing and sank into the chair by the window. She drew back the curtain a fraction, just enough to reveal Copper Creek's main street, bathed in moonlight. A town preparing to cast her out for the crime of refusing to be less than she was. Exhaustion momentarily overtook vigilance. She didn't notice the shadow that detached itself from the alley across the street, didn't see the figure that paused beneath her window before disappearing again. Only the sound of paper sliding beneath her door snapped her from reverie. Isabella approached cautiously, Winchester in hand. A folded note lay on the floor, plain paper sealed with a drop of candle wax, bearing the impression of a coin. She broke the seal and unfolded it slowly, revealing a message in a confident, though clearly unpracticed hand. Not all in Copper Creek share the council's opinion. Your presence here matters. Stay vigilant. No signature. No clue to the sender's identity. Only those few words offering an unexpected alliance. Isabella read them twice, searching for hidden threats or traps. Finding none, she tucked the note inside her medical journal, uncertain whether to find comfort or concern in this anonymous support. Dawn found her at her window again, watching as Copper Creek stirred to life. Sunday's sermon would undoubtedly feature warnings about her dangerous influence. By afternoon, the general store would likely refuse her business. By evening, the hotel might question her continued residence despite advance payment. So lost was she in these calculations that the knock at her door came as a jolt. Isabella concealed her rifle beneath a shawl before answering. A young boy stood in the hallway, hat clutched in dirty hands, eyes darting nervously. "Miss Wade, Ma says can you come? It's my sister Abigail. She's awful bad with the fever." Isabella recognized him as Daniel Harper, son of a widowed laundress who lived in the ramshackle cabins behind the livery. The council's order hung in her mind, but the desperation in the boy's face outweighed political concerns. "Let me gather my supplies," she said, already reaching for her medical bag. The Harper cabin proved worse than expected. Sarah Harper, thin as winter sticks, led Isabella to a back room where 10-year-old Abigail thrashed on a pallet, skin burning, eyes unseeing. The familiar sweet putrid smell confirmed Isabella's fear. Diphtheria, a disease that could sweep through towns like wildfire. "How long has she been this way?" Isabella asked, already opening her bag. "Started yesterday morning. By nightfall she couldn't swallow. I'd have fetched you sooner, but..." Sarah's voice faltered. "Word spread about the council's decision." Isabella nodded grimly. "You did right to call me now." She examined the girl's throat, finding the telltale grey membrane blocking her airway. "I need clean cloths, boiling water, and privacy. This will require precise work." For the next hour, Isabella fought for Abigail's life with every technique. Her training offered. She administered medicines from carefully labeled bottles, created a steam tent to ease breathing, and finally, when all else proved insufficient, performed a delicate procedure to open a breathing passage in the girl's throat. Sarah watched in equal parts horror and desperate hope as Isabella inserted a small silver tube that allowed Abigail to draw breath around the membrane choking her. Gradually, the girl's color improved, her struggles eased, and she fell into exhausted sleep rather than feverish delirium. "She'll need constant care," Isabella instructed, showing Sarah how to clean the tube and administer the medicines. "I'll return tonight to check her progress, but you must keep everyone else away to prevent spread." Sarah caught Isabella's hand as she prepared to leave. "The council said you're dangerous," she whispered, "but my Abigail would be dead without you." "The council fears what it doesn't understand," Isabella replied softly. "Knowledge in a woman's hands frightens men who believe power is their birthright." She slipped out the back way, avoiding the main street, but not before a thin man loitering near the livery noted her departure from the Harper cabin. By the time Isabella returned to her room at the hotel, Marshal Blackwood was waiting. "Seems you've chosen to defy the council's order," he drawled, blocking her doorway. Isabella met, his gaze steadily. "I've chosen to honor my oath to preserve life, Marshal. The Harper girl has diphtheria. Without intervention, she would have died by nightfall." "Noble intentions don't supersede law, Miss Wade. And what law have I broken?" "The council ordered me to cease practice within 7 days. By my count, I have 6 remaining." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Don't play games. You know damn well what was meant." "I know only that a child needed help I could provide," Isabella countered. "Would you rather I had let her die to satisfy Elijah Winter's wounded pride?" Before Blackwood could respond, a deep voice interrupted from the stairwell. "Problem here." Marshal both turned to find a stranger ascending the last steps, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in trail-worn clothing that nonetheless appeared recently brushed of dust. His face remained shadowed beneath a flat-brimmed hat, but the gun belt at his hip caught the light, as did the star-shaped scar visible at the edge of his jaw. "No concern of yours," Blackwood snapped, hand instinctively shifting toward his sidearm. The stranger made no threatening move, merely stopped at a respectful distance. "Couldn't help overhearing talk of diphtheria. Lost my sister to that as a child. Terrible way to go." His voice carried no particular accent, but its low timbre suggested a man accustomed to being heard without raising it. Isabella studied him with cautious interest. This was the first clear view she'd had of the man she'd glimpsed at the town hall meeting. Granite features, weathered by sun and wind, eyes the cold blue of deep winter, and a stillness about him that spoke of dangerous capability, carefully restrained. "The situation is under control," she said carefully. "Though I appreciate your concern, Mr. Stone," he supplied. "Morgan Stone." The name hung in the air between them. Marshal Blackwood's expression shifted from irritation to something approaching alarm. Even Isabella, isolated as she had been, recognized the whispered legend. Morgan Stone, the Wyoming ghost, a gun for hire, whose name was spoken in hushed tones from Dakota to the Mexican border. "What business brings you to Copper Creek, Stone?" Blackwood demanded, his earlier confidence diminished. Stone shrugged. "Just passing through. Thought I might rest a few days before heading north." His gaze shifted to Isabella. "Staying at the end of this hallway myself. Hope that won't be a problem for anyone." The implications weren't lost on Blackwood. The notorious gunman had taken a room directly opposite the woman he'd been ordered to intimidate. Whatever threats he'd planned to deliver suddenly carried new weight. "We were just discussing Miss Wade's impending departure," Blackwood said, attempting to recover authority. "Council's orders." "Is that so?" Stone replied, his expression revealing nothing. "Seems a shame to lose a healer when sickness is in town." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that somehow conveyed both courtesy and dismissal. "Good day, Marshal. Miss Wade." With that, he continued down the hallway to his room, boots making no sound on the wooden floor, a detail that sent an involuntary chill down Isabella's spine. Men who moved that quietly had reasons for doing so. Blackwood watched him go, then turned back to Isabella with narrowed eyes. "You've got 6 days," he muttered, "and if that child dies, Harper woman or not, I'll have you in cells before sundown." After he departed, Isabella entered her room and locked the door, mind racing. The appearance of Morgan Stone complicated matters immeasurably. Men like him brought violence in their wake, and violence was the last thing she needed. That evening, as promised, Isabella returned to check on Abigail Harper. The girl's condition had stabilized, her breathing easier thanks to the tube that Isabella cleaned and adjusted. Sarah's relief was palpable. "Word spreading about what you did," Sarah confided, voice low. "Some folks are questioning the council's decision." "It won't be enough," Isabella replied, packing her supplies. "Men like Winters and Blackwood don't reverse course when challenged. It only hardens their resolve." Sarah hesitated. "There's talk of another sort, too, about that gunman who's arrived, Stone. They say he's killed more men than smallpox." Isabella's hands stilled. "Has he caused trouble?" "That's the strange part," Sarah said. "He's been asking questions about you, not threatening-like, just curious about your doctoring, how you came to town." Isabella frowned. "Did he approach you directly?" "No, but he left payment for Abigail's care at the laundry. Said it was for the girl's medicine." Sarah produced several gold coins. "Never said his name, but Jenkins at the saloon recognized him straight off." Isabella accepted the coins with reluctance. "I don't understand his interest." "Men like him move in shadows," Sarah whispered, "but sometimes shadows are where the hunted find safety." The cryptic observation followed Isabella as she made her way back toward the hotel, taking a circuitous route to avoid Main Street. The evening had brought a light rain that emptied Copper Creek's thoroughfares, leaving her alone with the rhythmic sound of water on dust. Or so she thought, until the distinct click of a revolver being cocked echoed from the alley ahead. "Evening? Miss Wade!" The voice belonged to Caleb Winters, Elijah's oldest son, a 17-year-old who had inherited his father's arrogance without the restraint of experience. He emerged from the shadows, a pistol held in an unsteady hand. The smell of cheap whiskey clung to him. "Father says you've been defying the council." Isabella stepped back, calculating the distance to the nearest lighted window. "Put the gun away, Caleb. You're drunk and making a mistake." "No mistake," the boy slurred. "Father says you're dangerous, says you need to learn respect." "Your father speaks from wounded pride, not reason," Isabella replied evenly, shifting her medical bag to free her right hand. "Go home before this becomes something neither of us can undo." Caleb advanced, emboldened by alcohol and youthful invincibility. "Maybe I should escort you out of town tonight. Save everyone the trouble of waiting." The pistol wavered in his grip, its barrel sweeping dangerously close to Isabella. The sound that followed wasn't a gunshot, but something equally final, the whisper of steel leaving leather, followed by the distinctive click of a hammer being drawn back. Morgan Stone materialized from the rain shadows beside the alley's mouth, his Colt aimed not at Caleb, but at the ground near the boy's feet. "Son," he said quietly, "you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about pointing firearms at people who haven't earned it." Caleb's face drained of color as recognition dawned. "Mr. Stone, I wasn't." "You were," Stone corrected, his voice deadly calm. "Now you're going to lower that pistol, grip first, and place it on the ground. Then you're going to apologize." "Or to the lady." The boy complied with the clumsy haste of sudden sobriety. "I'm sorry, Miss Wade. It was foolish. I didn't mean—" "Go home," Stone interrupted. "And if I ever see you with a gun in your hand again, I'll assume you know how to use it properly, which means I'll respond in kind." Caleb fled into the rain, without his pistol, leaving Isabella alone with Stone. The gunman holstered his weapon with fluid grace, then bent to retrieve the boy's discarded revolver. "Terrible balance," he commented, examining it with professional disapproval before tucking it into his belt. "Hammer springs too tight for accurate shooting." He glanced at Isabella. "You weren't in real danger. That offers limited comfort when facing a drunk boy with wounded pride," she replied, studying him. "Why are you following me, Mr. Stone?" He didn't deny the accusation. "Let's say I've developed an interest in your situation. I'm not looking for protection." "Didn't offer any." A smile ghosted across his face. "Though I did leave that note." Isabella stiffened. "Why?" Stone considered her for a long moment, rain beading on the brim of his hat and shoulders. I recognize injustice when I see it, and I've witnessed enough town councils driving out those who challenge their control. My difficulties are not your concern, Isabella insisted, though with less conviction than before. Perhaps not, he conceded, but I find it curious that a woman with medical training that could save the governor himself chooses to practice in a backwater like Copper Creek. His eyes, sharp despite the gloom, assessed her reaction, almost as curious as why someone with your background travels under an assumed name. Isabella's breath caught. You know nothing about me. I know Isabella Wade doesn't exist in any medical registry east of the Mississippi, Stone replied quietly. Yet your techniques suggest European training. I know you speak at least 3 languages, based on the books in your room when the maid cleaned. And I know you're carrying a custom Winchester that belonged to a Union surgeon who disappeared after Gettysburg. The silence between them stretched, broken only by raindrops striking puddles. Who are you really, Mr. Stone? Isabella finally asked. A bounty hunter? He shook his head once. Just a man who recognizes a fellow fugitive. Before she could respond, he gestured toward the hotel. You should get inside. That Harper girl will need checking again by morning. He started to turn away, then paused. One more thing. Winters has telegraphed east for information about you. Whatever you're running from, it may find you sooner than those 7 days. With that, he disappeared into the rain-swept darkness, leaving Isabella with the unsettling realization that her carefully constructed walls had been breached by a man whose reputation was built on ending lives rather than saving them. That night, Isabella added a new entry to her journal, the words forming a conclusion she had been avoiding since her arrival in Copper Creek. Perhaps it is not merely circumstance that has me continuously cast out. Perhaps what they fear is not my independence, but my knowledge, the understanding that a woman who can heal also knows precisely how the human body can be undone. What separates the healer from the destroyer is merely intent, and intent, like truth, is something I've guarded more carefully than my own life. Outside her window, Copper Creek slept uneasily, rain washing its dirt streets into mud, while secrets and threats brewed behind closed doors. In a room across the hall, Morgan Stone cleaned his Colt with methodical precision, listening to the subtle sounds of a woman who, like himself, had learned the art of remaining vigilant even in exhaustion. Neither knew that events had already been set in motion that would bind their fates together in blood and fire. For in the telegraph office, a response had just arrived from Chicago, addressed to Elijah Winters, a message confirming his suspicions about the woman calling herself Isabella Wade, and offering a substantial reward for her detention. By dawn, diphtheria had claimed its second victim in Copper Creek. The blacksmith's youngest son, barely 4 years old, was found cold in his bed, the disease having worked its swift and merciless course through the night. By noon, 3 more children had developed symptoms, and panic bloomed faster than the illness itself. The news reached Isabella as she was changing Abigail Harper's breathing tube. Sarah Harper delivered it in hushed tones, along with word that Elijah Winters was organizing an emergency meeting at the church. They're saying it's God's judgment, Sarah whispered, glancing at her daughter who now slept peacefully, for allowing a woman who defies natural order to practice medicine here. Isabella's hands never faltered, though her jaw tightened. Diphtheria doesn't discriminate between the pious and the sinful, nor does it care about politics. It's a matter of contaminated water and close quarters. She finished securing the tube, then straightened. Your daughter improves because we took action. Others could be saved if treated quickly enough. Winters won't allow it, Sarah warned. He's convinced the town your methods are as dangerous as your ideas. Isabella gathered her supplies with methodical calm that belied her racing thoughts. Then their children will die needlessly. She closed her bag with a decisive snap. and I cannot stand idle while that happens, council order or not. She left the Harper cabin through the back door, already formulating a plan. The medicines required were running low in her supplies, but the components to make more could be gathered from the surrounding foothills, if she had time before Winter's men came for her. Lost in calculation, Isabella nearly collided with Morgan Stone as she rounded the corner of the livery. He steadied her with a brief touch to her elbow, then stepped back to a respectful distance. "Town's in an uproar," he observed, his voice pitched low. "Blacksmith's boy died, and the Petersons twins are showing symptoms." Isabella studied him, noting he'd exchanged his trail gear for a clean black shirt and vest, though the gun belt remained. "Are you reporting on me to someone, Mr. Stone, or is keeping track of Copper Creek's misfortunes merely a hobby?" A glint that might have been amusement crossed his face. "Neither. I've been asking what medicines might help. Seems there's a root that grows in these parts, Angelica they call it, good for breathing ailments." Isabella's surprise must have shown, for Stone continued, "My mother was a healer of sorts. Not formally trained like you, but she knew plants and their properties." The unexpected revelation shifted something in Isabella's perception of the gunman. Angelica would help, yes, as would several other herbs that grow in the eastern ravine. But I'd need time to prepare them properly, and time is something I'm rapidly losing. Stone's eyes narrowed slightly because of the telegram Winters received. It wasn't a question. Isabella sighed. "What exactly did this telegram say, Mr. Stone? Since you seem surprisingly well informed about matters concerning me, that Isabella Wade isn't your real name, that you're wanted for questioning in Chicago regarding the death of a prominent man, and that there's $1,000 reward for your detention." His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts on this information. Isabella absorbed this without visible reaction, though her mind rapidly assessed the implications. "I see. And does this reward interest you, Mr. Stone?" "If I were interested in rewards," he replied evenly, "you'd already be in Blackwood's jail." "Then what do you want?" Stone considered her for a long moment. "Same as you, I expect. To be left alone, to pursue my chosen occupation without interference." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Though our occupations differ considerably." "Indeed," Isabella agreed, "though both involve intimate knowledge of mortality." The observation hung between them, neither comfortable nor unwelcome, simply true. Stone broke the silence first. "I've secured horses behind the abandoned tannery on the west edge of town, packed with supplies enough for 3 days hard riding." When Isabella's eyebrows rose in question, he added, "In case your situation becomes untenable before your 7 days expire." Before she could respond, a child's cry pierced the air from the direction of Main Street. Without hesitation, Isabella moved toward the sound, Stone falling into step beside her, despite her not asking for accompaniment. They found a small crowd gathered outside the general store. At its center, a woman knelt clutching a girl of about 7, whose gasping breaths and blue-tinged lips told Isabella everything she needed to know. The mother looked up, desperation etched on her face. "Please," she begged when she saw Isabella. "Martha can't breathe. The doctor in Carson City is 3 days' ride away." Isabella knelt beside them, already opening her medical bag, the council's order forgotten in the face of immediate need. "How long has she been struggling?" "Since last night. She woke complaining her throat hurt, and by morning..." The mother's voice broke. In that moment, Elijah Winters pushed through the gathering crowd, Marshal Blackwood at his shoulder. "Step away from that child, Miss Wade," he commanded. "You've been expressly forbidden from practicing medicine in this town." Isabella didn't look up, her hands steady as she examined the girl's throat. "This child has minutes, not hours, Mr. Winters. Unless you've suddenly acquired medical training, I suggest you allow me to work. The council has spoken, Winters insisted, motioning for Blackwood to intervene. This disease is God's judgment, and your interference only compounds the sin. As the marshal moved forward, Stone smoothly interposed himself between officials and physician. He made no threatening gesture, drew no weapon, but his presence alone created a barrier few would willingly cross. "Seems to me," Stone drawled, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "that a man willing to let a child die to preserve his authority might find heaven's gates unexpectedly closed." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Blackwood's hand hovered near his holster. "This isn't your concern, Stone. Made it my concern," Stone replied with dangerous softness. "Just as every person watching has made it theirs, by choosing whether to stand with a healer or with men who'd rather be right than save a life." The standoff stretched as Isabella worked, swiftly administering medicine from a small blue bottle, then preparing instruments for the same procedure she'd performed on Abigail Harper. The mother watched with desperate hope, oblivious to the political battle raging around her child. "What she's doing is unnatural," Winters declared to the crowd. "A woman cutting into flesh, playing at being physician. It violates God's order." From her position beside the gasping child, Isabella finally looked up, her voice cold with controlled fury. "What violates God's order, Mr. Winters, is allowing preventable death because you fear a woman who doesn't bow to your authority." She turned to the gathering crowd, many of whom had children of their own. "This illness spreads through water and close contact. It can be fought with proper medicine and care. I can teach you how to recognize symptoms early, how to create medicines from local plants, how to perform basic procedures that will save lives." Her gaze swept over their faces, uncertain, fearful, but listening. "Or you can follow men who offer nothing but prayers while your children suffocate." A beat of silence followed, broken by the child's suddenly clearer breathing as air flowed through the tube Isabella had inserted. The mother's sob of relief spoke more eloquently than any argument. In that moment, the balance of power in Copper Creek shifted, not dramatically, not completely, but perceptibly, like the first tremor before an avalanche. Several men moved to stand near Stone. 2 women helped Isabella gather her supplies. Others simply stepped away from Winters and Blackwood, unwilling to align themselves but no longer supporting their authority. Winters' face darkened with rage. "This isn't over, Miss Wade. You've just confirmed everything I've claimed about you, that you undermine proper authority, that you spread dangerous ideas." He turned to address the crowd. "And now I know why." His voice rose triumphantly. "This woman is a fugitive from justice. She's wanted in Chicago for questioning in the death of Augustus Hammond, a respected physician who was found poisoned. In his office, the accusation fell like a gunshot." Isabella froze, her face suddenly pale. The crowd's mood shifted again, whispers rippling outward. Stone's posture changed subtly, his hand dropping casually closer to his weapon. "Is it true?" someone called. "Are you running from the law, Miss Wade?" Isabella rose slowly, her eyes never leaving Winters's face. "I am running from injustice, not justice," she said, voice steady despite her pallor. "Augustus Hammond was no respected physician. He was a man who used his position to harm vulnerable women, who then silenced their claims with his influence." She looked around at the crowd, no longer pleading but testifying. "I did not poison him, but I did treat his victims, documented their injuries, and attempted to bring charges against him through proper channels. For that, I became the convenient suspect when he died." "Convenient because you were found with poison in your possession," Winters countered, "because you had threatened him publicly." "I possessed medicines, not poisons," Isabella corrected. and I warned him that his crimes would eventually face judgment, whether earthly or divine." Her gaze hardened. "As will any man who abuses power to control women's bodies and lives." The implied parallel was lost on no one. Winter's face contorted with fury. "Marshal, arrest this woman immediately. The reward specifies she be held for Chicago authorities." Blackwood hesitated, measuring the crowd's mood and Stone's unwavering presence. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Elijah. The situation with the children." "Arrest her," Winters thundered, "or I'll bring charges against this entire town for harboring a fugitive." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then a new voice spoke from the edge of the crowd. A woman's voice, trembling but determined. "Miss Wade saved my Abigail." Sarah Harper pushed forward, her thin frame straight with resolve. "While Mr. Winters was calling town meetings, she was stopping death with her own hands. I don't care what they say she did in Chicago. Here, she brings life, not death." One by one, other voices joined, cautious at first, then with growing conviction. Not everyone spoke in Isabella's defense, but enough created doubt, enough questioned whether Winter's authority outweighed children's lives. Blackwood, sensing the shift, attempted compromise. "Miss Wade will be confined to her room at the hotel. Until we can sort this matter properly, she can continue treating the sick under supervision until authorities from Chicago arrive." Before Winters could protest, Stone spoke again, his voice carrying the quiet assurance of a man who never needed to shout to be heard. "Sounds reasonable, Marshal. I'll even volunteer to ensure she doesn't leave town." The implied warning in his tone was clear. He would be her guard, not Winter's men. Isabella gathered her medical bag, dignity intact despite the public accusations. "I'll need freedom to gather medicines, access to the sick, and assurance that my patients won't face retaliation." "Granted," Blackwood agreed quickly, eager to diffuse the situation. As the crowd dispersed, Winters caught Isabella's arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "This changes nothing," he hissed, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "When Chicago's authorities arrive, you'll hang. No gunslinger can protect you from that." Stone appeared beside them, his movement so fluid it seemed he had materialized from shadow. "I suggest you remove your hand, Mr. Winters," he said conversationally. "Miss Wade has patients requiring her attention." Winters released her with a shove that would have unbalanced her had Stone not steadied her again. "You're choosing the wrong side, Stone. There's nothing for you in defending her." Stone's expression remained impassive. "Wasn't aware I needed to profit from basic decency." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Good day, Mr. Winters." As they walked toward the hotel, Isabella finally asked the question that had been building. Since Stone's first intervention, "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Stone? And don't say it's because your mother was a healer. Men like you rarely act from sentiment." Stone was silent for several paces before answering. 3 years ago, I rode with a woman much like you. Educated, skilled in medicine, fleeing something in her past. She treated a bullet wound that should have killed me." His voice remained even, but something in it had changed. "When her pursuers caught up, I was too fevered to protect her. By the time I recovered, she was dead, and the men responsible had twisted the story to make themselves heroes." He looked at her directly, his eyes holding an intensity that belied his composed exterior. "So perhaps it is sentiment, Miss Wade. Or perhaps it's that rare thing in this territory, a debt being repaid." Isabella absorbed this, recognizing both the offered truth and what remained unspoken. "Did you love her?" "Wouldn't have mattered if I did," Stone replied. "She wasn't running towards something new. She was running away from something that had already broken her beyond repair." The implication hung between them as they reached the hotel steps. Isabella paused, considering the man beside her. A killer with a conscience, a wanderer with unexpected depth. "I'm not broken, Mr. Stone," she said quietly. merely interrupted. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good. Then we might both survive what's coming. As they entered the hotel, neither noticed the rider departing from the telegraph office, spurring his horse toward the eastern trail. A messenger carrying Winter's urgent request to expedite authorities from Chicago, along with a separate wire, to contacts who specialized in problems that required permanent, untraceable solutions. In her room, Isabella began organizing her medicines and instruments, mentally calculating what she would need to combat the spreading diphtheria. Stone took up position in a chair near her door, hat tipped forward, seemingly relaxed yet alert to every sound in the building. "They'll come at night," he remarked casually, checking the action on his Colt. "Winters isn't a man to wait for legal procedures when his pride is wounded." Isabella's hands stilled over her medical bag. "I won't have more deaths on my conscience, Mr. Stone, not even his." Stone studied her, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes survival requires compromise, Miss Wade, even for healers." "Not that kind," she replied firmly. "If I cross that line, I become exactly what they've accused me of being." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Then we'll find another way." He rose and moved to the window, scanning the street below with the practiced gaze of a man, accustomed to anticipating threats. But make no mistake, Winters and his kind don't merely want you gone. They want you erased, your very existence a cautionary tale for other women who might follow your path. Isabella squared her shoulders, the fading sunlight casting her shadow long across the floorboards. "Then they've fundamentally misunderstood what drives women like me, Mr. Stone. It isn't glory or rebellion for its own sake." Her voice softened. "It's the simple, unyielding belief that suffering can be eased by knowledge, regardless of who possesses it." As twilight descended over Copper Creek, a strange calm settled between healer and gunman, two outsiders united by circumstance and mutual recognition. Whatever darkness approached with the night, they would face it neither as savior and saved, nor as protector and protected, but as allies who had each glimpsed in the other a reflection of their own solitary path. Midnight found Copper Creek shrouded in an unnatural quiet. The saloon had closed early, its usual cacophony of piano and drunken laughter conspicuously absent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting. In her hotel room, Isabella worked by lamplight, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. Angelica root mixed with wild cherry bark and honey, the mixture would help ease the breathing of children suffering from diphtheria, though it couldn't replace the more invasive procedure for severe cases. Her movements were precise despite her exhaustion, each motion refined by years of practice. Stone watched from his position by the window, one shoulder against the frame, eyes continuously scanning the darkened street below. Neither had spoken, much in the past hours, settling into a companionable silence, broken only by the gentle scrape of pestle against mortar. "Fourth rider in an hour," Stone observed quietly, not turning from the window. "Same man, different horse each time. Circling, not passing through." Isabella sealed another small jar and added it to the row on her desk. "Winter's men? Probably." Stone shifted slightly, the moonlight catching the edge of his profile. "They're coordinating something, moving into position." She set down her tools with deliberate calm. "How many, do you think?" 7, maybe 8. His voice held no concern, just professional assessment. 2 at the rear staircase. 1 in the alley with a clear view of your window. At least 3, more at various points around the hotel. And Winters himself, most likely keeping a safe distance until the work is done. Isabella absorbed this, her hands unconsciously tidying her instruments as she processed the implications. That many men for one woman seems excessive. A ghost of a smile touched Stone's lips. "They're not here for you alone." His eyes met hers briefly. "My reputation tends to encourage over-preparation." The unspoken truth hung between them. Winters, intended to eliminate both problems in one night. The healer who challenged his authority and the gunman who had supported her. "I won't have you die for my cause, Mr. Stone," Isabella said firmly. "This isn't your fight. Made it mine the moment I stepped between Blackwood and that child," he replied simply. He moved from the window and checked his Colt with practiced efficiency. "Besides, men like Winters don't distinguish between interference and alliance. Walking away now wouldn't save me." Isabella studied him, seeing beyond the dangerous exterior to the complex man beneath. "You've faced worse odds." It wasn't a question, but Stone answered anyway. "Survived them too." He holstered his weapon and reached for his hat. "We have perhaps 20 minutes before they make their move. Any suggestions that don't involve shooting our way out?" Isabella's medical bag sat packed and ready on her bed. Not a retreat, but preparation for the wounded who would inevitably result from whatever happened next. "I know a different way out. Through the kitchen and root cellar." The hotel was built around an older structure, and not all passages appear on its current design. Stone raised an eyebrow. "You've been planning escape routes since arrival." "I've learned to anticipate unwelcome departures," she confirmed, a hint of dry humor in her tone. "Though I admit, being hunted by both local authorities and hired guns simultaneously is a new complication." As she gathered her belongings, her hand hesitated over the locked wooden case beneath her bed, the one containing her most private possessions and secrets. Stone noticed the pause. "Leave it," he advised. "Whatever's inside, it's not worth your life." Isabella's expression hardened. "Some things are." She retrieved the case, securing it inside her medical bag. "I've abandoned too much already to the fear and prejudice of men like Winters." Stone accepted this with a nod, respecting her decision without further comment. He extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, relieved only by moonlight filtering through thin curtains. "We'll need a distraction." "I thought of that," Isabella replied, moving to her desk and selecting several small glass vials. "These contain compounds that, when combined, create a rather impressive smoke with minimal actual fire risk." Stone's eyebrows rose slightly. "Medical training includes improvised explosives." "Chemistry has multiple applications," she answered with quiet confidence, "not all of them strictly therapeutic." For the first time since she'd met him, Stone's expression shifted to something approaching admiration. "Perhaps I underestimated why they call you dangerous." "Most men do," Isabella replied, carefully placing the vials in an accessible pocket. "It's easier to fear a woman's independence than to acknowledge her competence." With preparations complete, they moved silently to the door. Stone paused, his hand on the knob, head tilted as he listened for movement in the hallway. When he looked back at Isabella, his expression had returned to its professional detachment. "Stay behind me. If shooting starts, make for cover, not the exit, and if we get separated—" He hesitated fractionally. "The horses are still at the tannery, provisioned, for the northern trail toward Wyoming territory." Isabella nodded, understanding the contingency he was offering. Then, with unexpected boldness, she placed her hand briefly over his, where it rested on the doorknob. "For what it's worth, Mr. Stone, I'm glad it was you who witnessed that town council meeting." Their eyes met in the darkness, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition not just of alliance but of kindred spirits. Then Stone opened the door, and the moment dissolved into necessary action. The hallway stood empty but for shadows, though both sensed the wrongness in its silence. They moved with synchronized caution toward the back stairs, Isabella matching Stone's deliberately placed footsteps to minimize sound. At the stairwell, Stone gestured for her to wait, then descended 3 steps to gain a better view of the landing below. He returned almost immediately, his expression confirming their suspicions. "2 men," he whispered, "armed, waiting just out of sight." Isabella removed one of the vials from her pocket, uncorking it carefully. The sharp, acrid smell of chemicals filled the narrow space. "This needs to land between them for maximum effect." Stone took the vial, understanding her intent. "Cover your mouth after I throw it. The smoke will fill the stairwell quickly." With practiced precision, he leaned around the corner and tossed the vial down to the landing below. The glass shattered with a delicate tinkling sound, immediately followed by confused exclamations that transformed into choking coughs as thick, grey smoke billowed upward. Stone drew his weapon but didn't fire, instead pushing Isabella toward a narrow service corridor that branched from the main hallway. "Kitchen route," he directed tersely. "They'll expect us to exit through the smoke." They had nearly reached the kitchen when a voice called from behind them. Caleb Winters, the boy from the alley, now holding a rifle with far more confidence than he had wielded the pistol. "Stop right there," he demanded, his voice breaking, despite his attempt at authority. "Father said you're not to leave, Miss Wade." Stone moved to place himself between Isabella and the rifle, but she surprised both men by stepping forward instead of retreating. "Caleb," she said calmly, as though addressing a patient, "your father is using you to fight a battle that isn't yours. Think carefully about what happens next." The boy's hands trembled slightly. "You defied the council. You're wanted for murder. Father says you're corrupting the town with your ideas. The only corruption in Copper Creek is the willingness to let children die rather than accept help from a woman," Isabella replied evenly. "Ask yourself why that threatens him so deeply." Confusion flickered across Caleb's young face. His grip on the rifle loosened almost imperceptibly. "Father says—" "I know what your father says," Isabella interrupted gently. "I'm asking what you think, Caleb. You've seen the children I've treated. You know I haven't harmed anyone." The boy's resolve visibly wavered. Stone remained utterly still, his hand near but not on his weapon, allowing Isabella's words to work where violence would only escalate. "They'll kill you if you try to leave," Caleb finally blurted, his voice small in the shadowed hallway. "Not just escort you out of town. Father hired men from Carson City. Real killers." Isabella nodded, acknowledging both his warning and the courage it took to deliver it. "Then let us pass, Caleb. Don't have that on your conscience." Something broke in the boy's expression, perhaps the first fracture in the foundation of his father's influence. He lowered the rifle slowly. "The back way past the pantry," he whispered. "There's only Jenkins watching that door, and he's half drunk already." Stone moved forward, gently taking the rifle from Caleb's unresisting hands. "You might want to be elsewhere for the next hour," he advised, his tone lacking its usual edge when addressing the boy. "When your father asks, tell him we overpowered you. No shame in that, against a known gun hand." Caleb nodded shakily, then disappeared back toward the main staircase, the burden of decision visibly lightening his step, despite the consequences he might face. "You handled him well," Stone observed, as they continued toward the kitchen. "Not many would risk talking down a frightened boy with a rifle." "He's a child being molded by a cruel father," Isabella replied. "I've seen too many Calibans who started as Mirandas." Stone's eyebrow rose slightly. "Shakespeare?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My education wasn't exclusively medical." "Mr. Stone." They navigated through the kitchen, past sleeping staff who never stirred as they passed. The root cellar door creaked despite their caution, freezing them both in momentary tension, but no alarm sounded. Below, musty darkness enveloped them, the earthy scent of potatoes and preserves filling the narrow space. Isabella led the way to what appeared to be a solid stone wall, revealing a narrow gap where the foundation had been imperfectly joined to an older structure. "It opens to the creek bed," she explained, "well away from where they're watching." Stone studied the opening with professional assessment. "Tight fit, but manageable," Isabella confirmed, "even for your shoulders." They were navigating the narrow passage, Stone in the lead, when the first shouts erupted from the hotel above, their absence discovered. The passage widened as it joined what must have been an old mining drainage tunnel, allowing them to move more quickly through the absolute darkness, guided only by Stone's outstretched hand against the rough wall. Fresh air greeted them as they emerged behind a stand of scrub pine near the creek, well beyond the hotel's perimeter. Without discussion, they set a course for the abandoned tannery, keeping to shadows and using the creek's gurgling sounds to mask their movements. They had nearly reached the tannery when the night exploded into violence. The first shot kicked up dirt at Isabella's feet. The second would have found her heart had Stone not pulled her roughly behind a water trough. More bullets splintered wood around them as Stone returned fire with controlled precision, his colt barking twice, answered by a pained cry from the darkness. 3 shooters, he muttered, ejecting spent cartridges and reloading without looking down. Maybe 4. They must have guessed our destination. Isabella pressed herself against the rough wood, medical bag clutched to her chest. The horses? If they're smart, they've already secured them, Stone replied grimly. We need a different approach. Isabella's mind raced through options. The livery. We could... Her words died as a new voice called from the darkness. Elijah. Winters, his tone carrying the false reasonability of a man accustomed to negotiation, backed by force. Miss Wade, there's no need for further bloodshed. Surrender yourself and Stone can ride away unharmed. My quarrel isn't with him. Stone's expression darkened. He's lying, he said quietly. They can't afford witnesses now. I know, Isabella replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She reached into her bag, fingers finding a second vial nestled beside her instruments. I have 3 more chemical diversions. If we time them correctly... The night suddenly blazed with firelight as a torch arced through the air, landing near their position. More followed, illuminating the space between buildings and eliminating potential escape routes. Shadows revealed. The positions of at least 5 men closing in on their meager shelter. Damn, Stone muttered, shifting to get a better angle on their attackers. They're better organized than I expected. Isabella's hand closed around Stone's wrist, surprising him with its strength. There's something I need to tell you, she said urgently. About Chicago, about why I'm really running. Stone shook his head once, sharp and decisive. Doesn't matter now. It does, she insisted, because what happens next depends on you knowing the truth. Her eyes held his, fiercer than he'd yet seen them. I didn't kill Augustus Hammond, but I wanted to. He experimented on women, immigrants, prostitutes, anyone society deemed disposable. Called it advancing medical science. Stone's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes changed, a deepening of focus, as though seeing her more clearly. And you exposed him? I tried, Isabella confirmed. Gathered evidence, testimonies, but his colleagues protected him. Then he was found dead, poison in his wine. The same compound was found in my medical supplies. Planted? Presumably. Her grip on his wrist tightened fractionally. I ran not from justice, but because I knew no jury would believe a woman over. A respected male physician's colleagues. Another volley of shots splintered their cover, ending the moment of revelation. Stone returned fire, his aim deadly accurate despite the poor visibility, dropping another of their attackers. Makes no difference to me, he said, his voice containing no judgment. Guilty or innocent, no one deserves to be hunted like this. Relief flickered across Isabella's face, quickly replaced by renewed focus on survival. On my signal, throw. This toward the largest group, she instructed, pressing a vial into his palm. Then we move immediately toward the creek bed. It's our only chance. Stone nodded, positioning himself for both the throw and their subsequent dash to safety. Isabella uncorked the final vial, mixing its contents with the second in precise amounts. Now, she commanded. and Stone hurled the combined mixture toward the three men advancing from the north. The reaction was instantaneous and far more dramatic than the smoke in the stairwell, a blinding flash followed by a concussive wave that sent their attackers sprawling. In the chaos, Stone and Isabella broke cover, running low and fast toward the creek's sheltering darkness. They had nearly reached it when a shot rang out from an unexpected direction. The creek bank itself, where a sixth man had positioned himself. In anticipation of exactly this escape route, Stone recognized the threat a fraction of a second too late. He twisted, attempting to shield Isabella, but the bullet found its mark, tearing through his left shoulder and spinning him around with its impact. He staggered, but remained upright, returning fire even as blood darkened his black shirt. Isabella released a strangled cry, not of fear, but of fury. In one fluid motion that belied her genteel appearance, she dropped to one knee, drew a small derringer from inside her medical bag, and fired with surprising accuracy. The hidden shooter pitched forward into the creek with a splash, his rifle falling uselessly beside him. Stone stared at her for a heartbeat, genuine surprise breaking through his composed exterior. "That was unexpected. I told you my education wasn't exclusively medical," she replied tensely, already moving to examine his wound. "Can you still ride?" Before he could answer, Winter's voice cut through the momentary quiet. "You've killed 3 men tonight, Stone. Add that to your tally. And for what? A woman who brings nothing but death wherever she goes." Stone's expression hardened, pain giving way to cold focus. 5 horses behind the tannery," he said to Isabella, ignoring Winter's taunts. "Shoot anything that moves between us and them." Isabella nodded, helping him to his feet. "You're losing blood." "Wouldn't be the first time," he replied grimly. Then, with unexpected gentleness, "Stay close. Whatever happens next, we leave together or not at all." The simple declaration, made amidst gunfire and pursuit, carried more weight than any flowery profession could have. Isabella met his gaze, understanding passing between them without words. Then they were moving again, 2 shadows among many, bound together by circumstance and choice, toward horses that represented their only chance of escape from a town that had first rejected her healing hands, then forced them to take up weapons instead. Behind them, Elijah Winters rallied his remaining men, his fury at their impending escape overriding caution. $1,000 to whoever brings me the woman alive," he shouted, desperation edging his voice. "Stone can go to hell." As they reached the tannery's edge, Stone paused, his injured shoulder not hampering his aim, as he fired methodically, each shot finding its mark with chilling efficiency. Not killing shots, but disabling ones, legs, arms, one hat sent spinning. "Into the darkness, making a point?" Isabella asked breathlessly as they finally reached the horses. Stone's lips curved in the barest hint of a smile. "Leaving witnesses. Sometimes reputation serves better than additional bodies." He helped her mount, despite his injury, then swung into his own saddle with practiced grace that betrayed only the slightest falter. As they urged their horses forward, Winter's voice followed them, promising retribution, rewards, justice that was anything but. Neither looked back as Copper Creek receded behind them, the darkness of the trail ahead somehow less threatening than what they left behind. They rode through the remainder of the night, following deer paths and dried creek beds. Rather than established trails, Stone led with the instincts of a man long accustomed to evading pursuit, choosing routes that would confound trackers and create false trails when necessary. Despite his injured shoulder, he maintained a punishing pace that spoke of the danger. Still behind them, Isabella matched his determination, asking neither for rest nor offering complaint. The medical bag secured to her saddle contained all that remained of her life in Copper Creek, instruments, medicines, journals, and the mysterious locked case that had been worth risking their escape for. Occasionally, her hand would drift to it, as if ensuring it remained safe. Only when the first grey light of dawn crept across the eastern horizon did Stone finally signal a halt. They had reached a sheltered basin, ringed by rock formations that offered both protection and vantage points. A small spring provided fresh water, and scrubby juniper created natural cover for their horses. "We'll rest here," Stone announced, dismounting with a stiffness that betrayed how much the wound had taken from him. 2 hours, no more. Winters will have riders on our trail by first light." Isabella slid from her horse with less grace, but equal purpose, immediately moving to examine his injury. "Sit," she commanded, her tone brooking no argument. "That needs proper attention before it festers." For once, Stone complied without resistance, lowering himself onto a flat rock as Isabella retrieved supplies from her medical bag. She worked with practiced efficiency, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric to reveal the bullet wound, a clean through and through that had missed bone by a miracle's breadth. "You're fortunate," she observed, cleaning the entry wound with an antiseptic solution that made even Stone's stoic expression tighten momentarily. "Another inch to the right, and your shooting days would be finished. Wouldn't be the first career change forced on me," he replied dryly, watching her hands with professional interest. "Started as a surveyor for the railroad, if you can believe." Isabella raised an eyebrow as she threaded a curved needle. "From maps to gunfights seems an unusual progression. War has a way of redirecting a man's path." His voice held no self-pity, only statement of fact. "After Shiloh, precision took on a different meaning," she nodded, understanding more than he had explicitly stated. "This will hurt," she warned, before beginning to close the wound with neat, surgeon-quality stitches. Stone remained perfectly still throughout the procedure, his only concession to pain being the occasional measured breath. When she finished, bandaging both entry and exit wounds, he examined her work with approval. "You've done this before," he observed, "not just on the already dead." "Field hospitals during the war," she confirmed, washing blood from her hands with precious water. "That's where I learned that formal medical training requires supplementation with practical necessity." She repacked her supplies, movement slowing, as exhaustion began to catch up with her. Stone noticed, of course, little escaped his observation. "Get some rest," he directed, less command than concern. "I'll take first watch." Isabella started to protest, gesturing toward his shoulder, but he cut her off with unexpected gentleness. "You've been awake for nearly 2 days, treating the sick and then running for your life. A tired healer makes mistakes. I can still shoot with my right arm if needed." The simple logic of it, combined with bone-deep weariness, overcame her objections. Isabella arranged her saddle as a makeshift pillow and settled beneath a thin blanket. Within moments, exhaustion claimed her, pulling her into dreamless sleep. Stone maintained his vigil, scanning both their back trail and the surrounding terrain with methodical patience. Only when certain they were momentarily safe did he allow himself to examine the woman sleeping nearby, her copper hair coming loose from its severe styling, the lines of strain relaxing from her face in slumber, revealing someone younger than she appeared when armored by necessity. Something unfamiliar stirred in him, an emotion he had walled away so thoroughly he barely recognized it. Not simply protection or duty, but genuine admiration for her courage, her skill, her refusal to abandon her principles, even when they brought her to the edge of destruction. "Who are you really?" he murmured, too quietly to disturb her. "And what in that locked case matters more than escape?" As if in answer to his unheard question, Isabella shifted in sleep, one hand unconsciously moving to protect the medical bag beside her. The gesture spoke volumes about instincts formed through repeated loss. 2 hours later, as promised, Stone woke her. The sun had crested the eastern ridges, bathing the basin in golden light that belied the danger they still faced. Isabella roused, quickly, transitioning from sleep to alertness with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being woken for emergencies. "No signs of pursuit yet," Stone reported as she splashed water on her face. "But they'll have picked up our trail by now," Isabella nodded, checking his bandages with critical assessment. "The wound looks clean, no signs of infection, but you've lost blood. You need rest and nourishment, not another day of hard riding." "Luxuries we can't afford," he replied pragmatically. "Not until we're beyond territorial jurisdiction." As they prepared to depart, Isabella paused in securing her medical bag to the saddle. After a moment's consideration, she retrieved the locked wooden case that had been the subject of Stone's earlier curiosity. "You asked last night why I couldn't leave this behind," she said, running her fingers over the polished surface. "You deserve an answer, especially given what it's cost you." She produced a small key from a chain around her neck and opened the case. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay not jewels or money as might have been expected, but documents, dozens of them, carefully preserved. Stone moved closer as she withdrew several pages covered in precise handwriting and detailed anatomical drawings. "These are medical records," Isabella explained, her voice taking on a hushed intensity. "Evidence of what Augustus Hammond did to 27 women under the guise of research. Procedures without consent, experiments without anesthesia, deaths classified as unavoidable complications." She turned another page, revealing photographs that made even Stone's hardened expression darken. When Hammond was found poisoned, these disappeared from official evidence. The women who had testified suddenly recanted or disappeared themselves. It became clear that his colleagues weren't just protecting him. They were protecting a system that viewed certain women as acceptable sacrifices to medical advancement. Stone studied the documents with growing comprehension. "You took these before you fled." "I stole them," Isabella corrected without apology. "And I've been gathering more evidence at each stop. Other doctors like Hammond, other victims who survived." Her eyes met his, fierce with purpose. "This case contains the only record of women who would otherwise be forgotten, whose suffering would be erased as though it never mattered." The revelation hung between them, shifting Stone's understanding of her flight. Not merely personal survival, but a mission that risked everything for others who couldn't fight for themselves. "You're not just running from something," he observed quietly. "You're running toward justice none of these women could obtain through legitimate channels." Isabella closed the case carefully, her movements reverent. "The law offers no recourse when the powerful close ranks. Sometimes bearing witness is the only justice possible." Stone absorbed this, seeing her now with new clarity, not as someone who needed saving, but as a warrior fighting a different kind of battle than his own. With unexpected gentleness, he helped her secure the case in her saddlebag. "Then we need to ensure these records reach someone who can use them properly," he said simply. The decision made, they mounted and resumed their journey, now heading northwest, toward a pass that would take them beyond easy pursuit. As they rode, Isabella finally asked the question that had been building since their hasty departure. "Where are we going, Mr. Stone? Beyond simply away from Copper Creek?" He considered before answering. "There's a settlement 3 days' ride from here. Clearwater. Small enough to avoid notice, large enough to disappear in. The sheriff there owes me a debt he can't repay. He'll look the other way while we determine our next move." Isabella noted the use of "our" rather than separate paths, but didn't comment on it directly. "And when Chicago's authorities eventually track me there?" "By then, we'll have moved on," Stone replied with practical assurance. "The trick isn't to disappear forever. It's to stay one step ahead until pursuers find easier prey." The philosophy of a hunted animal, Isabella observed, not unkindly. Stone's expression remained impassive. Or a successful predator. Depends on your perspective. They rode in silence for several miles, each processing what lay ahead. The terrain grew more rugged as they approached the foothills of mountains that marked the territorial boundary. Stone's injured shoulder clearly pained him, though he made no complaint. Isabella monitored him with a healer's attentiveness, noting the increasing pallor beneath his sun-darkened complexion. By midday, they reached a narrow pass that would provide their best route through the mountains. Stone reined in his horse at its entrance, studying the terrain with tactical assessment. Perfect place for an ambush, he noted, scanning the rocky heights that flanked the trail. We'll need to wait for darkness and proceed on foot, leading the horses. Isabella followed his gaze, recognizing the danger. You think Winter's men could have circled ahead? Possible, though unlikely they'd know exactly which pass we'd choose, Stone replied. But there are others who monitor these routes. Deserters, outlaws, bounty hunters who prey on those crossing boundaries. As if summoned by his caution, the distinctive metallic click of a rifle being cocked echoed from the rocks above. Stone reacted instantly, pushing Isabella's horse behind an outcropping, while drawing his weapon in a single fluid motion. "That's far enough," called a voice from the heights, young, nervous, but determined. "Drop your hardware and state your business." Stone remained perfectly still, eyes tracking the source of the voice without revealing tension. "Just travelers. Passing through," he responded evenly. "No quarrel with whoever claims this territory." A figure emerged partially from behind a boulder, barely more than a boy, though the rifle he held was very real and aimed with the unsteady hands of someone unaccustomed to confrontation. "This pass is tolled," the boy announced, clearly reciting. "Your practiced words, $2 per rider or goods subject to inspection." Isabella started to reach for her bag, but Stone stopped her with a subtle gesture. Something in the situation had caught his professional attention. "That's reasonable," he called, "but I'd prefer to pay the man in charge directly, not his lookout." The boy hesitated, uncertainty crossing his young face. "I speak for our camp." "No," Stone contradicted with calm certainty. "You're bait, meant to distract while others take position." His voice hardened slightly. "Tell whoever sent you that Morgan. Stone doesn't appreciate being ambushed by amateurs." The effect of his name was immediate. The boy's eyes widened, and he nearly dropped his rifle in shock. "Stone, the shootist!" Before Stone could respond, another voice, older, authoritative, called from further up the rocks. "Stand down, Jimmy! Get back to camp!" A bearded man, in his 40s, emerged, hands deliberately empty. "Apologies, Mr. Stone. The boy's new to our arrangement." Stone relaxed fractionally, though his hand remained near his weapon. "Devereux, didn't realize you'd claimed this pass." "Recent development," the man replied, making his way down to the trail. He nodded respectfully to Isabella before returning, his attention to Stone. "Heard you were operating further south these days." "Circumstances change," Stone answered neutrally. Devereux studied them both, taking in Stone's bandaged shoulder and Isabella's medical bag. Understanding dawned in his weathered face. "Running from something?" "Passing through," Stone corrected, the subtle warning clear in his tone. The older man nodded slowly. "Well, friends of Stone pass without toll." His gaze lingered on Isabella, with undisguised curiosity. "Though I admit you're keeping different company than last I heard." "The lady is under my protection," Stone stated flatly. "That's all anyone needs to know." Devereux raised his hands in a placating gesture. Meant no offense. He glanced back toward the direction they'd come from. "Might interest you to know we turned away riders from Copper Creek this morning. 6 men, heavily armed, asking about a woman and a gunman traveling together. Isabella tensed, but Stone's expression remained impassive. "And what did you tell them?" "That we hadn't seen anyone matching that description," Devereaux replied with a sly smile. "Sent them 10 miles. South to Walker's Crossing. Figured any trouble they had with you wasn't trouble I needed to inherit." Stone nodded once, the barest acknowledgement of a service rendered. "Appreciated." However, Devereaux continued, his tone shifting to business. "That courtesy won't extend to those coming behind them. Chicago marshals, from what those boys were saying. Due within 2 days. Isabella's hands tightened on her reins, the news confirming her worst fears. Stone, however, appeared unsurprised. "Then we'll be well clear by then," he stated with quiet confidence. "We'll take the North Fork after." "The pass?" Devereaux nodded. "Unmarked trail 3 miles in, branches right beyond the lightning-struck pine. Adds a day to your journey, but avoids the main routes where they'll be watching. With direction secured and an unexpected ally found, they prepared to continue." As they moved to depart, Devereaux called after them, addressing Isabella directly. "For the first time, ma'am, whatever they're hunting you for." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Must be something special to have Stone riding alongside. Known him 15 years, and he's never escorted anyone he didn't believe deserved protecting. Isabella glanced at Stone, whose expression revealed nothing, then back to Devereaux. "It's not protection I sought, Mr. Devereaux. Merely justice that the law seems unwilling to provide." The outlaw nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Best kind of traveling companion, then. Stone's notion of justice tends to be more reliable than any court I've encountered." As they made their way through the pass, Isabella pondered Devereaux's words and the reputation they revealed. Not simply a killer for hire, as Copper Creek had whispered, but a man with principles that existed outside conventional law. "You have interesting friends, Mr. Stone," she observed as they navigated the narrow trail. "Acquaintances formed by circumstance," he corrected, though without defensiveness. "Out here, today's adversary might be tomorrow's ally. Survival depends on recognizing which is which." They continued in companionable silence until reaching the fork Devereaux had described. As they paused to water the horses, Stone suddenly stiffened, his hand dropping to his weapon. "What is it?" Isabella asked, instantly alert to the change in his demeanor. "Riders," he replied tersely. "At least 4, moving fast. From the south." Isabella listened but heard nothing. "Winter's men?" Stone shook his head. "Different approach, more disciplined." His expression darkened. "Marshals? Chicago sent them directly by telegraph, not overland as we expected." Fear flashed across Isabella's face, quickly replaced by determination. "How long?" "Minutes, not hours," Stone assessed grimly. "They'll have fresher horses, and we're leaving clear tracks in this terrain." For a moment they locked eyes, both understanding the implications. With Stone's injury and their exhausted mounts, outrunning professional lawmen was no longer possible. "You should go," Isabella said suddenly, her voice firm with resolve. "This is my fight, not yours. Your wound needs proper care, and there's no reason for both of us to be captured." Stone's expression hardened. "That's not how this works." "Be practical," she insisted. "They want me, not you. You're injured, and continuing together only ensures we're both caught. Separately, at least one of us might succeed." For several heartbeats, Stone said nothing, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with unexpected gentleness, he reached out and tucked a strand of copper hair behind her ear, a gesture so intimate it momentarily stole her breath. "Take the North Fork," he directed quietly. "I'll lead them south. Once they're committed to pursuit, double back toward Clearwater. The sheriff there, Samuel Holt, will honor my name if I don't arrive." Isabella started to protest, but he continued, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Your evidence matters. Those women's stories matter. My shoulder will heal, and I've evaded worse than territorial marshals. The logic was impeccable, but something else passed between them in that moment. An unspoken recognition that their brief alliance had become something neither had anticipated. Without warning, Isabella leaned forward and pressed her lips to, here's a gesture both fierce and tender. Find me, she whispered as they separated. When you've lost them, find me in Clearwater. Stone's expression softened fractionally, the granite features revealing the man beneath. Count on it. With no further words necessary, they mounted and prepared to separate. Stone turning his horse south toward the open plain, where he would become the visible target. Isabella continuing north into the sheltering forest that might conceal her passage. As they parted, Stone called after her one last instruction. Remember, Sheriff Holt, tell him Morgan Stone always settles his debts. Isabella nodded, committing the name to memory, then urged her horse forward without looking back. The choice to separate was logical, necessary, and felt like physical pain as she rode away from the first person in years who had truly seen her for who she was. Behind her, Stone watched until she disappeared among the trees. Only then did he turn his mount south, straightening in the saddle despite his injury. As he rode toward the approaching lawman, his expression returned to the impassive mask that had served him through countless confrontations. 7 riders appeared on the horizon, moving with the coordinated precision of men who hunted humans. Professionally, Stone calculated odds, distances, alternatives, and settled on a plan that would draw them as far from Isabella's path as possible. Checking his weapon one final time, he spurred his horse forward. Not in retreat, but in calculated advance, becoming the threat they would have no choice but to pursue, while the woman they sought disappeared into wilderness with evidence that could topple powerful men if it reached the right hands. The separation was tactical, necessary, the only logical choice. Yet as he rode toward certain confrontation, Morgan Stone realized something that countless adversaries would have deemed impossible. He had found someone for whom he was willing to risk not just injury but capture, someone whose cause had become, against all reason and experience, his own. Clearwater existed in that liminal space between wilderness and civilization. One main street bordered by essential establishments, surrounded by scattered homesteads, that gradually surrendered to untamed frontier. Unlike Copper Creek's brash desperation, this settlement carried the quiet dignity of a community built by choice rather than circumstance. Isabella had arrived 10 days earlier, exhausted and alone. Sheriff Samuel Holt, a grey-bearded man with kind eyes and a legendary past he never discussed, had honored Stone's name without question, providing a small cabin on the settlement's edge where she could recover and remain inconspicuous. Stone saved my boy during the Mason County troubles, was all Holt offered by way of explanation. Man like that calls in a favor. You don't ask unnecessary questions. The days since had passed in tense vigilance. Isabella established a quiet routine, gathering herbs in the surrounding woodland, organizing her medical records, and watching the trail from her cabin window. Each sunset without Stone's arrival carved another line of worry into her expression. On the 11th day, Holt stopped by with supplies and news that twisted like a knife. Territorial dispatch came through. 7 marshals engaged in a firefight near Cottonwood Pass. 1 dead, 2 wounded. His eyes held sympathy beneath their weathered creases. No mention of captures, but blood was found at an abandoned campsite further north. Isabella absorbed this with outward calm that belied her. Inner turmoil. And Copper Creek, any word from there? Elijah Winters has formally charged you with multiple crimes, practicing medicine without proper credentials, assaulting his son, theft of property. Holt's mouth tightened beneath his mustache. Also claiming you bewitched the Harper girl with unnatural treatments. A bitter laugh escaped Isabella. Of course, when rational accusations fail, resort to superstition. Holt studied her with the measured assessment of a man accustomed to distinguishing truth from convenient stories. The Harper child lives, by all accounts. Several others who received similar treatment from you survived as well. Winters has lost considerable standing over his handling of the outbreak. A small measure of peace settled over Isabella at this news. Whatever else had happened, lives had been saved. Her work, however briefly performed, had mattered. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said quietly, "for everything." Holt nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "I'll keep asking about Stone. Man like that doesn't fall easily." He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Wade, or whatever your real name might be, I don't know what you're carrying in that case you guard so carefully, but I recognize the look of someone with purpose beyond survival." His eyes, sharp beneath bushy brows, met hers directly. "Whatever justice you're seeking, I hope you find it." After he departed, Isabella returned to her window vigil, watching shadows lengthen across the dusty main street. 2 weeks had passed since their separation. Even an optimist would begin questioning Stone's survival. Yet somehow, despite evidence and logic, she couldn't bring herself to leave Clearwater without certainty. That evening, as she prepared a simple meal, Isabella catalogued her dwindling options. The urgency of her larger mission pulled against the desperate hope of Stone's return. How much longer could she justify waiting? Every day increased the risk of discovery, of Winters or Chicago authorities tracing her location. As darkness fell, she reached a decision. 3 more days. If Stone hadn't appeared by then, she would accept the probable truth and continue eastward toward the journalist in St. Louis who had agreed to review her evidence, a woman whose suffragist publications had demonstrated both courage and integrity. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Not the usual rhythm of locals returning from daily labors, but the deliberate pace of someone unfamiliar with the settlement's layout. Isabella extinguished her lamp and reached for the derringer she now kept within constant reach. The rider stopped directly before her cabin. Through the window's thin curtain, she could discern only a silhouette, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low, something slightly uneven in the posture that suggested injury or fatigue. Her heart seized with recognition. Moments before, the distinctive triple knock pattern confirmed it. Isabella flung open the door without caution, propriety forgotten in the rush of relief. Morgan Stone stood in her doorway, trail dust coating his clothing, beard growth shadowing his jaw, and his left arm supported by a crude sling. His eyes, however, held the same steady intensity she remembered, and something new that might have been tenderness. "You're late," she managed, voice catching despite her attempt at composure. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Got delayed by an unplanned detour to Carson City." His gaze swept over her, cataloging details with visible relief. "You're well?" "Better now," she admitted simply, stepping back to allow him entry. "Though Sheriff Holt had me fearing the worst." Stone removed his hat as he crossed her threshold, revealing a new scar across his temple. "Reports of my demise have always been premature," he remarked dryly, though not for lack of trying on Chicago's part. As she closed the door behind him, Isabella couldn't stop herself from reaching out, her healer's hands gentle as they assessed his injured arm through the fabric of his shirt. "What happened?" "Disagreement with several marshals regarding my freedom of movement," Stone replied, submitting to her examination with uncharacteristic patience. One was particularly insistent. Had to convince him otherwise. The clinical understatement didn't disguise the reality. He had fought, killed if necessary, and sustained further injury to honor his promise to return. The knowledge settled in Isabella's chest, a weight both terrible and precious. "Sit," she directed, gesturing toward her small table. "You need proper care and food." Only after he complied did she allow herself to ask the question burning since his arrival. "Were you followed?" Stone shook his head once, made certain of it, took a circuitous route, changed horses 3 times, created false trails. His expression hardened slightly. They believe I'm headed for Mexico. By the time they discover otherwise, we'll be long gone. The use of we wasn't lost on Isabella. She busied herself preparing food and gathering medical supplies, using the necessary tasks to organize her thoughts. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried carefully measured hope. I've made arrangements to meet a journalist in St. Louis, a woman who runs a reform paper willing to publish evidence of medical abuses against women. She set a plate before him, her movements betraying nervous energy. With her help, these records might finally reach people who can create genuine change. Stone nodded, understanding the significance. When do we leave? The simple question, the unquestioned inclusion of himself in her journey, caught Isabella off guard. She studied him, searching for hidden motives or reluctance, finding neither. Your involvement has already cost you too much, she said carefully. This isn't your fight, Morgan. His use of his given name hung between them, acknowledging the shift in their relationship. Stone's expression softened infinitesimally. Perhaps it should be, he replied, surprising her with unexpected conviction. I've spent years selling my gun to causes I barely understood. Might be time to invest in one worth the price. The admission, simple yet profound from a man of few words, stripped away final barriers. Isabella sank into the chair across from him, emotion overwhelming her usual composure. They'll never stop hunting us, she whispered. Winters, Chicago, men like Hammond's colleagues, they have resources, influence, the law itself on their side. Stone reached across the table with his uninjured hand, covering hers in a gesture both protective and reassuring. Then they'll learn what it means to become the hunted instead of the hunters. In the lamplight, his face revealed the man beneath the legend, not simply a killer with principles, but someone capable of commitment to a cause greater than survival. Someone who recognized in Isabella not just a woman to protect, but a mission worth sacrificing for. Why? She asked simply, needing to understand what had transformed a temporary alliance into something deeper. Stone considered his answer with characteristic care. You risked everything to preserve truth others wanted buried, to speak for women who had no voice. His eyes met hers directly. In a world where most people look away from injustice when it becomes inconvenient, you've refused to blink. That's worth standing beside. The explanation, honest without flowery declarations or grand promises, embodied everything she had come to respect about him. In a lifetime of being judged for her intelligence, ambition, and refusal to accept limitations, Isabella had finally found someone who valued precisely those qualities others feared. It won't be safe, she cautioned, offering one final chance to reconsider. Or simple. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Stone replied with quiet certainty. In that moment, something crystallized between them. Not merely attraction or respect, but partnership forged in shared purpose. Two people considered dangerous by a world that preferred compliance, now united in a mission larger than either. The next morning found them preparing for departure before dawn. Isabella's evidence was securely packed, along with medicines and supplies for the journey. Stone had acquired fresh horses, his injured arm now properly treated and bandaged under her care. As they mounted to leave Clearwater behind, Sheriff Holt appeared from the early morning shadows, rifle in hand, but pointed groundward. Figured. You'd be leaving soon, he remarked, nodding to Stone with the respect of one professional acknowledging another. Telegram came in late last night. Thought you should know. Elijah Winters was found dead in his office in Copper Creek. Apparent heart failure, though timing seems convenient. Isabella's eyes widened, immediately turning to Stone with unspoken question. He met her gaze steadily. Wasn't me, he stated simply, "though I won't pretend to mourn him." Holt nodded, accepting the denial. Local gossip suggests his son Caleb has been talking about his father's corruption. Something about money changing hands to falsify charges against a certain female healer. Justice finds unexpected paths, Isabella observed softly. Indeed it does, Holt agreed. He extended a folded paper to Stone. Safe passage documentation, listing you both under different names. Might help if you encounter official inquiries. Consider the debt between us settled. Stone accepted the document with solemn acknowledgement. Appreciated Samuel. As they rode out of Clearwater, Isabella and Stone side by side on the eastern trail, the rising sun cast their shadows long across the land ahead. Neither knew what awaited in St. Louis or beyond. Whether the evidence would find proper champions, whether their hunters would eventually catch up, whether the partnership now forged would withstand the challenges ahead. Yet something fundamental had changed. In both, Isabella Wade, deemed too dangerous to marry because she challenged men's authority over women's bodies and minds, had found strength beyond mere survival, a mission with potential to create ripples of change for countless others. And Morgan Stone, the feared gunslinger known only for dealing death, had discovered purpose beyond his reputation and a cause worthy of his formidable skills. What Copper Creek never understood was that dangerous people aren't always those who threaten violence or upend convention. Sometimes the most dangerous are those who simply refuse to accept injustice as inevitable, and who find one another despite a world determined to isolate them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.